Global Justice Ecology Project. And I just got a recording in progress. So I was, okay. And Standing Trees Vermont for hosting. We're really happy that you're screening our film, and I want to thank everybody who attended. You know, much gratitude for being present. I'm looking forward to your questions. And I also want to mention that as a former Vermonter, I used to live in Thetford for about 10 years. I love that these two places are together in this meeting. They're two places I really love, Southern Illinois and Vermont. And I love that there are these fierce forest defenders present. So makes me very happy to think about my time there and my time here. So briefly, I just wanted to say, you know, I'm a cinema professor, so it's important to me to talk about archiving stories, and that these stories are really critical to preserve. And these stories are coming from smaller places, and so often they're overlooked. And it took years of being here before I began to hear of these amazing activists who I so appreciate and their success. And I think that wherever you are, there are probably stories like this. And I hope that you work to preserve them. And that doesn't mean making a documentary, it just means collecting oral histories or photographs or any materials that folks still have around. And I know now things are online, but that wasn't the case in the 90s, right? So please do that. Please help keep these histories alive. They're important for young folks to understand. And as a professor, that's always important to me, to take my students out into the forest, but also to hear these stories. I think that to a student, it's always been inspirational for them. The film ends without a solution, as you know. And so that was really important to me, because I wanted the conversation afterwards to be a place where we could think about what should happen to public land given this current context of climate change. So I'm hoping that that kind of conversation will happen here. And I know that John has an amazing and a really important proposal, which I fully support, for what might happen with the forest here, that I'm hoping you'll all stay for and give thought to. But that is the question that I wanted to leave with, and not provide a solution like many documentaries do, like, you know, do this. That's not what my intent is. So again, thank you very much. And I look forward to your good questions and comments. John, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Cade. Cade, you want to carry on this important history, and you know, that's precisely what this film has accomplished. It is if people understood what burdens you had to overcome, pitfalls, roadblocks in finding and unearthing and saving this documentary, this archival footage, it's absolutely incredible. And as we know, there's always interests out there wanting to rewrite history. But as Teresa introduced me, I am a founding member of the Shawnee Forest Defense. I'm also a founding member and president of a local chapter of the Illinois Audubon Society, the Shawnee chapter. Illinois Audubon Society is the oldest non-governmental conservation organization in the state. And I've been working at trying to protect these forests for 30, I think we're looking at 34 years now. And it's been quite an exciting ride. And thanks to Global Justice Ecology Project, and which has been always been a great supporter of activities in the Shawnee, and to Standing Trees as well. Zack.
Well, I was gonna, before you hand it over to me, John, say a little bit more about the national park proposal, just so that people have some grounding in what you're working on.
So we've fought for years in the courts and in the court of public opinion to stop commercial exploitation of the Shawnee, and it just hit me recently. The Shawnee is now in the hands of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service, and I just recently there was a publication, a Terrain magazine, out of the St. Louis metropolitan area, where the district ranger in the Shawnee that oversees all these timber sales that we're looking at was quoted, and this is when I realized. I mean, I realized this, but a long time ago. But this really spells it out. So this is Tim Pullman, and he said, the Forest Service is an organization that cuts trees. It's in our congressional mandate. And that is really what the issue is. You know, it doesn't matter what it's, they couch it under every different term you can imagine, restoration, forest health. I mean, on and on. It's just, they're going to cut trees, period. It's not for forest health. And so, and if you think about it, that's what the Department of Agriculture is known for. It's not for really caring for the farmland. You know, their goal is to produce a crop that produces revenue, and that's what's happening right now. The Forest Service is driven by the revenue they get, and they get a lot more revenue when they lose taxpayer money selling trees. So now we're facing this devastating. I mean, we see it every day. Today we broke records in Southern Illinois and Western Kentucky on the temperature. You know, this is the hottest it's ever been on May 11th in this area. You know, it's happening everywhere. Fires are raging out west. You know, storms, flooding. Climate change is upon us, and we've been given clear directives on what we need. We need to correct things, and so it just makes sense that in reality, when the Forest Service was first started, Gifford Pinchot had the concept of managing for the most people for the longest amount of time, basically doing the best, providing the best thing for the most people for the longest amount of time. And they've lost that. And they're influenced heavily by industry. And so I'm proposing, and we're proposing, the Shawnee Forest Defense is proposing transferring the Shawnee from the Department of Agriculture into the Department of Interior to be managed as the new Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve. So that's where we are at this juncture, and it's getting quite a bit of interest. So do you want me to talk more about it, Zach, or would you like to?
And I'll share a little bit about kind of the view from the view here in northern New England, and then we can open it up to questions, and I'm sure you'll get more questions about the park proposal. And you know, just a really amazingly inspiring film, and Cade, thank you for putting it together. Thanks to Global Justice Ecology Project for having us all here tonight, and for being the fiscal sponsor of Standing Trees. GJEP was critical to our kind of formal launching this last fall, going from a ragtag group of dedicated but volunteer activists to at this point a much more, I would say, heavy hitting and powerful little organization, punching above our weight, and it's exciting to see where we've come in such a short time, and it's just more exciting about where we can go next. But as inspiring as the film is, I think like John is alluding to, it's just so sad that we're fighting the same battles now that we were fighting back then. And Standing Trees is lucky. This is kind of ironic, but through no connection related to this film or to any of the people here, we fell in with the Lewis and Clark Law School's Earthrise Law Center, which is where Tom Buchel is the co-director. And so we are working with Tom right now, as a matter of fact. I was just on the phone with him earlier today, and we are, getting 30 years of his expertise, and to help, drive a new way of doing business on public lands here in New Hampshire and Vermont, where Standing Trees focuses most of its efforts right now. Although we have a whole New England mission, and I'll just say that these issues are real, and they're going on now, and there's no shortage of things to take action on. Today is the deadline for comment on a terrible project on the White Mountain National Forest, and in just a moment I think I might put the action alert that we have into the chat, so that if you haven't already commented, you can go and submit a comment, which, like we were hearing about in the film, is the first step to making sure that you've got the standing that you need going forward. And there are more terrible projects coming our way in Vermont on the Green Mountain National Forest soon. The good news is that there's a great national conversation going on right now, not just about these national park proposals, but also about changing the way the Forest Service operates and what they're managing for. And we can dig into that more too, maybe in the Q&A. But there's no question there's a lot of bad projects coming forward right now, and that have been approved recently. But I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, because I think that there's actually some great momentum, more momentum than I think there's been in a long time, especially for our eastern forests, and the value of our eastern forests, letting them grow old. I think we've got better science and better public understanding of the value of our backyard forests here in the East than there's ever been. So I'll stop there, and we can jump into the questions.
Okay. Thanks, Zach. Thanks all of you for introducing yourselves and your work. One of the very first questions that came through, and John, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, if there's anything you can add to what the process looks like for getting the Shawnee transferred into a national park. And while you explain that a little bit further, I can also put the link to the petition into the chat if you want to mention that as well.
The link to the what? I'm sorry.
The link to the petition for the Shawnee to become. Yeah. Great.
Oh, great. Thank you. I was actually going to mention that. So it's no small undertaking. To transfer, to create a national park requires an act of Congress. And so we're starting at the bottom and going up. We're basically trying to educate our lawmakers and get some local governments on board with the National Park and Climate Preserve proposal. But we're fortunate enough to have two Democratic senators that have a really strong environmental record, Tammy Duckworth and Dick Durbin. And so we're hoping that we can get them to come on board. But it's a process. This is a big change, and people struggle with change. But I think it's well researched. I always direct people to our website, the Shawnee Forest Defense.org website, where we also have the petition online to learn more about it, to read about it. And we also have been doing a petition campaign and a letter writing campaign. And interestingly enough, we've got a Progressive Democrats of America Action Network letter campaign that has already sent 2,600 letters of support to Congress about this proposal. And if y'all are interested in participating in that online, it's pretty easy to do. And voice your support. Please email Shawnee Forest Defense at gmail.com or go onto our website and subscribe to it, and we will send you a link. It's an incredibly long link, and unfortunately don't have it to place in the chat like Zack does, but we're making headway, and what's so interesting about it is the economic benefits really outweigh the economics of resource extraction, and I think we're getting a lot of local leaders on our side as a result of it. And then you throw in the fact that the most efficient means of sequestering carbon that we have on land today is mature forest, and it only makes sense that our public lands, where the best examples of mature forests are found throughout the country, it's the best way. It's the best way to make that happen. And when we log, industrial logging just releases so much carbon. It's an incredible, contributes an incredible amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And we need to stop doing that stuff. We need to start making some serious changes if we're going to save life on Earth as we've come to know it.
Great, thanks, John. Let's see. Just pulling up these questions. So one of the other questions that we had was, so the arguments that led to the injunction was true then. Is it not still true to get another injunction?
It's different. Basically, the one of the best arguments we had, and I think I actually answered one of the chat questions first off, was a rule in the Code of Federal Regulations that the Forest Service was required to maintain minimum viable populations of native vertebrate species on the forest, and once we won that case, it took over. It took off, and folks, activists around the country started using the same argument, and so what had happened? The Forest Service had the regulations changed, so that that minimum viable populations regulation that is no longer there, however, there are some other regulations, and the Forest Service is violating the National Environmental Policy Act right now, the Administrative Procedures Act. They're currently operating in the Shawnee, and it's happening all over because they're in such a hurry to get the cutout, and it's a shame. In the 90s, there was such a strong voice that was heard against this. A lot of logging around the country was halted because it's just not a good use of our money. It's not a good use of our natural resources, and it threatens the wildlife that relies on these places. But the Migratory Bird Treaty Act is still in effect, and that is they're logging presently right now in Pope County. I just went just past a log truck full of logs from the Robnet Hollow timber sale yesterday on my way down south. They're also violating NEPA so they're logging in the middle of nesting season, of songbird nesting season. So when a tree is cut and it's got a nest in it, guess what happens? Those birds in the nest die, or if they're eggs, they die. That is in violation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So they're actively logging right now, but they're also operating without have taken a true, long, hard look at climate change. And they're required by the National Environmental Policy Act to do that. And the current plan that they have is an outdated 2006 management plan that actually acknowledges that it's outside the scope of that management. Well, now climate change, they're required to address that issue. And so we could go back to court. What happened with the release of the injunction was the Forest Service issued a new plan. And it was the 2006 management plan. And the Forest Service told the judge, it's all different. We corrected all the errors. And the judge said, Tom Bushell, the attorney for the Regional Association of Concerned Environmentalists, RACE, and Heartwood Sierra Club, even he argued against that and said, well, that's not the case. And the judge said, then you need to bring it back before us. It's not the court's job to manage the forest. So the permanent injunction was on the 1992 plan. And so the judge said, if you think they're violating the law, then you can bring it back to court. And so we have considered that. We have been participating in all of those activities of submitting comments and objecting. It used to be appeals process. Now it's objections. You file an objection if your comments are not addressed. And then the next step is a lawsuit. And we've considered that, and we may actually end up doing that, but it's a long, drawn-out process. And the worst part about it is it's temporary. It's the same thing's going to happen. It's the Forest Service is going to go back. Again, let me repeat that. It's in our congressional mandate. The Forest Service is an organization that cuts trees. We're going to be fighting that the whole time. We shouldn't. We need more national parks in this part of the country. We need more wild areas. That's the best way we have to counter this climate crisis that we're facing right now. And so we could, I guess, in answer, the injunction, we could likely go through that process. Usually that's a 4-year process, generally speaking, exhausting all means through the court system, and it's costly. It's costly for the plaintiffs as well as the government. I mean, you should see the banks of attorneys that they bring to court. And I just don't think it's the best use of our resources, our tax dollars, and these beautiful places like the Shawnee.
So I
Zack,
think
you're muted.
Teresa, do you mind if I just jump in real quick? Just to say, I didn't mention this earlier, but I want to say, there's a national park proposal that has been made in New England too. Restore the North Woods, which is a great organization based in Massachusetts, does a lot of work in Massachusetts and Maine primarily, but works on public land issues generally. Has proposed for a long time a new Maine Woods National Park, and it has also proposed national park status for the Green and the White Mountain National Forests. And I think these ideas are going to catch on more and more and more. There's just so much science coming out right now. The idea of strategic climate reserves is one that Dr. Beverly Law at the university, no, I'm sorry, I think she's at Oregon State, in Corvallis. She has put out some amazing papers in just the last year or two. In fact, I think one came out today in conjunction with a local climate expert, Bill Muma, who we work closely with at Standing Trees, and they have just put together amazing, science that I think is also, really digestible by scientifically minded people too. And I encourage you to read the papers that Bill and Bev Law have put out. Here in the East, I especially recommend a paper that came out in 2019, co-authored by Susan Massino and Ed Faison. The title of the paper is Proforestation. And proforestation is a concept of allowing our intact forests to grow older. And it's a term that, they realized needed to be kind of created because we didn't have a kind of functional word for just leaving our forests alone. in kind of forestry speak. But as John is saying, this national park concept, the idea of strategic climate reserves, I think the time is right now for these big conversations. And there is an opportunity right now at the federal level to protect mature and old forests on Forest Service lands without transferring it to the Park Service. And President Biden issued an Earth Day executive order that was a real mixed bag of an executive order. There was a lot of bad stuff in there, but the one glimmer of hope that I see in it, and I think we all need to jump on, is the opportunity to do something like we did 20 years ago with the roadless rule, which would be to promulgate a rule, which is an administrative process. The Forest Service can do this itself. It doesn't take an act of Congress. And we can put older forests off limits to logging on Forest Service lands. And there's a great coalition right now, Climate Forest Coalition, climate-forest.org. You can sign the petition there. And we're calling for forests of 80 years of age and older to be off limits to logging on public lands. And that actually is a lot of forest land in the National Forest System. So there's a lot of great opportunities right now and good momentum, both on the national parks front and also, in these other ways. And I think we've got to just keep fighting all of these different, avenues to get to, where we want to be.
So what about, so one of the questions is any potential cons in making the Shawnee National Forest a national park? John, do you see any cons in this?
I've not heard any effective. There's definitely opposition, and it's mostly those people that make money either promoting the agency's work are actually doing the agency's work. Within, we get a lot of U.S. Department of Agriculture funding in Southern Illinois, but one of the big issues was hunting and trapping and dispersed camping. Was folks were challenging the fact that you can't do that on national parks. And actually, there are some parks that do allow some level of hunting. I'm not sure about trapping, but the best way to ensure that those activities are continued is through the climate preserve proposal. We have 21 preserves in the U.S., and preserves allow for more flexibility with management. But since this would be a climate preserve, we would make sure that the legislation that is involved in transferring it, that no natural resources will be extracted, no logging, no mining, no drilling for oil and gas. But that's a big one, the hunting. Then there is this campaign that, and again, they're usually people that benefit from creating non-forests out of forests, opening up the forest and logging it and burning it, and that opposition is claiming that they have to do it for forest health, that it actually regenerates, that it's good for the birds, it's good for the forest. And if you didn't get that message after watching the Shawnee Showdown, I don't think you were paying attention. We've got 30 plus years of examples of failed projects that we were told over and over again. We're still getting them. They're still happening today. They're, and what the agency is claiming is just not taking place. And you'll have people, if you like, there's certain types of game animals that thrive in disturbed forests, and folks like that will support that. But we've got the the organisms that are suffering are the organisms that need large tracts of forest, organisms that need good, clean water, and that really suffer at the hands of climate change, and increased temperature. Every time you remove trees from the forest, and the forest becomes significantly warmer, and that's a problem for a lot of species. It opens sunlight where shade was once. So we have some opposition, but I think that the economics behind a national park in the center of the country is going to outweigh all of those, especially the economic ones. And I think we'll, only time will tell, but we'll see.
I'd like to add that, for folks who are in Illinois and who come down to the Shawnee Forest Defense group often has these ground truthing expeditions where folks will take you into the forest and you can see for yourself what's happening on these sites that were logged a few years ago, were logged 20 years ago or so. And so it's a very powerful trip. Also, you'll see some of the beauty of the Shawnee National Forest, but these ground truthing expeditions, I think, really help us understand what's going on there. It's see for yourself, draw your own conclusions, and do some of your own research. So do check that out on the website.
Thank you, Cade.
So I think a sort of intriguing question, possibly for all of the panelists. What would it look like to pay people or have resources that protect the forests rather than destroy the forests? So paying people not to cut trees. Any idea what that would look like?
Zach, you want to try that?
Well, in some ways we already do some of this when we offer tax incentives for private landowners to keep their forest land intact. Some states, not Vermont yet, we're trying to change that. It's actually the only New England state that doesn't do this, but some states, including most New England states, even will provide tax breaks for landowners who don't want to do any logging at all, want to maintain a wild forest if they own a certain amount of forest land. So there's I guess precedent for this concept as far as private lands go. For public lands, it's interesting to think about. I think we've the idea of compensating or assisting people, through transitions from one area of work to another. That's something that I think we've talked about for a long time with folks coming out of, say, the coal industry, or people in, other impacted portions of the economy as our societal values shift and our knowledge changes. I think, it's an interesting idea. I don't have a ready-made plan to be able to pay people to not cut, but I think I think it's in a lot of ways analogous to what John is talking about, which is to pay an agency. We all pay with our tax money agencies to manage our land, and we should be getting something back from that actually benefits the public. And right now, the way we're managing our national forests is not benefiting the public. It's lining the pockets of relatively few people. It's not benefiting the resource. Multiple use is kind of a myth. The multiple use mandate, really doesn't achieve the kind of forest conditions that we need out there on our public lands. So I think we do need to think about how we shift management so that our tax dollars are going to work for us. And that involves either, like John is talking about, shifting things to a different federal agency, or changing the paradigm of management inside the Forest Service. And so I guess in that way, we can definitely put our money in different, different places and try to get a different benefit from our forests that way.
I also think, Zach, that's very good points, but I also think that we do that with our national parks. That's the money, the tax dollars go toward what is considered the either into recreation or protecting the resource, as opposed to going into lining the pockets of resource extractionists. And then we have a degraded ecosystem left behind, and that's the difference. I think that that combined with the recreation opportunities that will open up, and we have, for instance, in the Shawnee, I believe the Shawnee it's 289,000 acres, and it spans, I believe, nine counties. 9 or 11. I always get that confused, in Southern Illinois. And I believe they have 3 law enforcement officers. And that's illegal ATV use is rampant in the Shawnee, and it's almost a joke. You can't reach law enforcement if you see people tearing up a place, with ATVs. And that's just one, example. We can, I would much rather pay to have rangers taking people on hikes and interpretive walks and doing environmental education, natural interpretation than paying people to mark and cut timber. It's and then walk away from it, and that's what the Forest Service does. They make all these promises that things are going to happen, and it just doesn't. It doesn't happen, and we've not only lost money, we've lost resources too. We've lost these things, these trees that are amazing. Something else too, besides just the ability that mature forests have for sequestering and storing carbon, recent studies are now documenting the actual physical and chemical cooling that they provide. So the Shawnee is actually keeping Southern Illinois, I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 degrees or 0.5 degrees Celsius cooler than surrounding areas. And so we have to keep that in mind. I mean, it literally, anyone that walks in the woods knows that it's cooler in the forest, in the shade, than it is out in the sun. And we've got to take, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has made it very clear that we've got to make serious changes. And this is a good way to start that, to initiate that movement. And I think that I would love to see a Central Hardwoods climate preserve come out of this, and just spread from the Shawnee. And I think it's doable. I really do. It's not going to be easy, but most things in life that are worthwhile aren't.
I think that's a good segue into this next question. I'm going to try to combine 2 of these questions, but essentially it's based around collaboration. So, what would it look like, Zach and John, for folks working on forest defense in the Green Mountain National Forest to sort of follow the Shawnee Forest Defense's proposals to have their own national forest, and also who legislatively would need to be invited, to this table?
Any thoughts on that? That's could you restate that, Teresa? I'm not sure what we certainly welcome collaborating with folks in the Shawnee, with folks in the Green Mountains. That, and we've got a lot of organizations that are doing that. Shawnee Forest Defense is a key player with a sponsor of Heartwood, which is more focused on in a larger geographical area in the central hardwoods region of the country. And we certainly welcome that kind of collaboration, sharing information. I mean, the problem I see is we're so geographically far away, and there's, the Vermont forests are significantly different than Southern Illinois forests. It's the same philosophy, frankly. It's not. This isn't just happening in the Shawnee anymore. Than it's just happening in the forest out west. The Gallatin National Forest out west, for instance. That's the same concepts. The Forest Service is claiming that they have to log for forest health and do these excessive artificial fire and introduce these artificial fire programs. But it's a different, that ecosystem's different. And that's my point is, that has different needs than, and different habitats than the Shawnee has, and they shouldn't be approached the same, the exact same way. There's different critters that live here, different plant species that rely on our forests that you all in Vermont have.
Well, I'll just add that I think we do need to band together as Easterners who care about our forests broadly. And I think a lot of the attention for conservation action in this country, understandably, because of kind of the just amazing landscapes of the Western US, that's where kind of all the attention goes so often. And I think that our Eastern forests get written off as being kind of, just run of the mill, no biodiversity worth saving. We've kind of done them in so many times over the last several centuries that there's nothing worth fighting for here anymore. And I think that that's a kind of a popular narrative that we have to overcome. And we still got this frontier mentality that, the West is the place that, we can still fight these battles and where there's something worth fighting for. And it's just not the case. And I think, not only is it not the case on the biodiversity front, but it's also the case, especially on the climate front, because we can store far more carbon in our Eastern forests than we're capable of storing in Western US forests. And the Pacific Northwest understandably gets all the attention because of the amazing old growth that still remains. It's not a lot of old growth, but it's more than we've got here in the East. But the fact is that the potential for carbon storage here in the East is far greater overall than what the potential is for carbon storage out in our Western US forests. And so as a kind of global climate solution, practicing proforestation here in the East is one of the greatest things that we can do as a nation with our public forests. And we need to band together across the region to put forward, I think, a vision that is like what John is doing on the Shawnee, but on an even grander scale. Out west, the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act has been on the books for, I think, 25 years probably now, introduced every single session of Congress. And I think it would be really helpful for there to be some kind of large scale vision introduced for Eastern public lands in the same way, to really celebrate what we have here and what could be if we allowed our public lands to rewild. And so, I think there is a huge opportunity for us all to work together across forests, across, state boundaries. And, now's the time to start banding together and elevating, those ideas.
Agreed.
All right, so we have time for a couple more questions. How important do you think nonviolent direct action is to saving public forests? And do you feel it helped make a difference in Shawnee's injunction in the 90s?
It absolutely made a difference in the 90s. It's interesting. The courts don't rule in a vacuum. You know, they're aware of what's going on, and the fact that in 1990, when we did get a stay for a year at Fairview, that was a big point. You know, there were people that were, and we had a fellow that even got ran over by the timber buyer for the East Perry Lumber Company. He ran over him in his pickup truck. But you know, it was an issue that eventually, I mean, that action promoted so much. It never before has this happened. The entire U.S. congressional delegation for Illinois wrote the Forest Service and asked them to hold off on logging until they finish their. You might remember the point where Glenn Pichard said I introduced legislation on the film, and that's what it was. They had legislation that would stop the Fairview timber sale and wait for new planning process to go through, but it didn't make it into the Senate, and so all of that plays an important role in the process. I mean, I don't think nonviolent direct action is appropriate all the time, but when you exhaust your legal means, you know, that direct action played a key role in the founding of this country. You know, it's played a key role in our politics. You know, up to current day, you know, the civil rights movement, it's just on. And I think that that sometimes when people are willing to sacrifice their freedoms, others sit back and think, well, what is so important? You know, I once remember an Earth First musician that was touring around, and he referred to Earth First as the alarm clock of the environmental movement. And sometimes people need to be woken up. And he said, I hope that's what we can do, and you know, set off that alarm, because frankly, we're at a crisis. The alarm should be sounding. I mean, you know, we could continue to have more. What was it that Greta Thunberg said? Blah blah blah. I mean, as a result of the Glasgow, summit in Glasgow, I believe it was last fall. You know, she's like, we've got to take action, and direct action is one of the most. You know, she even took action with her strikes. So it's time. We've got to make some stands. And so I think it can play an important role. Do you have anything to add to that, Zach?
No, I think you said it perfectly. And Cade, do you want to add anything there?
I was just going to go back to the banding together. I think when John started speaking about direct action, he was also speaking about the powers that be, which are so strong, you know, against doing anything productive around climate change. And when we band together, then we also create a much stronger force, and I think a stronger voice. And so there was a question. It's hard for me to see the questions in the setup that I have, but I saw one flash on the screen talking about banding together and what would it look like. And that's such a evocative question. So, you know, we would have to get together, wouldn't we? We would have to actually create a space where we could talk together and see what it would look like. And it seems, I think, from the Q&A that there's interest in that, and that it might be worthwhile to try to move that forward and see what that might look like, and what that could do to benefit all of us who are working on these issues, nationally, or at least the East and the Midwest.
Yeah.
Direct action, direct action has been used, and it has been successful in so many movements. And I think, as both of you have said, there's a time and a place for it, and I think, again, that requires more discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should move this idea forward of keeping this conversation going and making plans collectively across the region. So let's all find a way to follow up on that, and maybe with GJEP's help, we can reach back out to the people who are on the call tonight and this webinar, and people who weren't able to make it, and try to get something going. I think that would be great to do. And a few of us have already been talking about kind of rewilding the East movement, and so let's keep that going.
Well, Zach, I noted somewhere in my research that there was a Eastern wildlife corridor, and people were working on a corridor that began in the Appalachians and moved northward, and they were really pursuing it. It was a particular organization. Is that something that you are aware of, that you are participating in? I thought it was a really interesting idea, thinking about how there's going to be quite a bit of migration and movement of species as climate change impacts us across the range.
Yeah, there are a lot of fantastic visions for Eastern U.S. wildlife corridors, and Midwestern, and Great Plains,
right,
and Western. So and those corridors have been at this point mapped, and action has been proposed at the very local level, town to town, all the way up to broad regional work to facilitate wildlife movement. And there's a number of groups. The Wildlands Network is a great group that does wildlife corridor work, and I highly recommend checking them out. Working across large regions. They're probably, I would say, the best when it comes to advancing these concepts nationwide of wildlife connectivity. But then at the local level, state level, regional level, there are a whole slew of other groups, of course, from Shawnee Forest Defense to Standing Trees, and many others that are working on it at a more regional level.
I think this is a really great segue into maybe one final question. We had a couple of people ask Cade about buying or renting the documentary to show it locally as a way of rallying folks to support our standing tall relatives, is how it was put.
Oh yeah, please just contact me, and we work with I work with a lot of different groups to get this out, and if we're within traveling distance, we might be able to coordinate a panel as well. So my email is cadebursell@gmail.com, and that's CADEBURSELL@gmail.com. And I'm more than happy to work with you on that. Thanks for that question.
Okay. Do any of the panelists have anything that they'd like to say in closing?
One thing I would like to say is, and again, to go back a couple questions about what it would look like with jobs and money going toward keeping forests standing. And one of the things that is so evident is how little we truly understand about the complexity of our forests. And I think it's been most prominently discovered, pointed out by Suzanne Simard and her research with the mycorrhizal network and the different complex interactions that take place between different trees and these fungi, mycelia. It's just absolutely incredible stuff. That's what we need to be doing. We put so much of our resources in this culture into technology that creates things that unfortunately, too many of those things destroy the natural world, are more efficient at destroying the natural world. And we have very little understanding of the actual natural world that we rely on. And when someone like Dr. Simard comes out with these discoveries, it just really highlights the fact that we need to really do some more studying and see what we can do. Maybe we can do these start spreading out with some of these rewilding migratory routes, and that would just be such a refreshing use of our resources, of our tax dollars, as opposed to to funding an industry that just that's boom and bust and that just degrades our natural world.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind picking up on that thread because I love Suzanne Simard's work, and John, as you know, she began publishing her studies 30 years ago, and she was part of the Forest Service in Canada, and they just really dismissed her science, and she's gone on to really produce some amazing papers, and she's brought this notion of a networked forest into the popular culture through her most recent book, which is really good. It's hard to do, and we've brought that up. I've brought that up in my comments to the Forest Service, and it's just, that's what's frustrating when you try to speak to the Forest Service and ask about this science and ask about this newer science, then there isn't much of a response, and the response is equally dismissive, and so there isn't a way to have a dialogue with the Forest Service, in my experience, and without any of the science that we present being dismissed. And that's frustrating. And that just makes you think that there is no hope for the Forest Service changing its way of thinking about the forest in the context of climate change and in the context of this new science. So that's kind of discouraging. But what is inspiring to me are moments like this, where the panelists are speaking about what they're doing. Activists are speaking about their work in their local communities, and they're in attendance to these films, and so to the film screening. And I just find that to be inspiring, and I hope it continues. I really do, because I think that we really have to move on this issue, and in all ways. And it takes all of us to do that, as we know. So, and I thank you for creating this forum for us and this conversation.
And on that science thread, we're probably way over time already, and we could talk about any one of these different questions all night. But I think this is a really important one, which is that. Yeah, like you said, Cade, I think everybody finds the science or makes the science that kind of supports their conclusions or their values, and the Forest Service is guilty of this. We have science that really is just kind of serving the bottom line of the agency, and they continue to refuse to really take into account all of the other science that's out there. Joan Maloof in the comment thread here is concurring, and I think what that points to is that unfortunately science alone isn't going to cut it, and I think we all know that, but the science is great to support the work that we're doing, but it takes political will, it takes the grassroots organizing, it takes the legal action, and then when nothing else works, I think the direct action to wake people up. And I think it's actually important to mention too that direct action doesn't just have to happen at the scene of a potential logging project. There's a lot of places for direct action in building a campaign, along the way. And so it's critical that we know the science, that we leverage it as much as we can to educate the public and decision makers, but it really comes down to, what does the law say? And right now, the law gives the Forest Service all the discretion it wants, oftentimes, to do whatever it wants. And until that changes, they're going to be really reluctant to accept other ways of thinking about forest management. And so, we've got to fight the political fight to get to where the science, the great science that's out there, actually means something to the Forest Service. So that's our charge as the grassroots. That's what we've got to work on.
Yeah, and we could definitely keep this conversation going all night, but I love the enthusiasm, and there's so much more to follow up with on all of this work. So thank you so much, Cade, Zack, and John, for putting this panel on and for presenting this film. And thank you to all of the attendees tonight who came out and watched the film and were part of this panel. We have all of your email addresses. So like Zack said, we can certainly work on being in touch. I know some of you mentioned that some of the links weren't working in the chat, so we can certainly follow up with those as well. Most immediately, for more information on anything about the Shawnee, you can visit shawneeforestdefense.org. That's it. I hope
Thank you,
everyone has a
Teresa.
good night. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes,
all so
Thank
much.
you,
you.
Zack. Thank you, Cade.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep, thanks for joining in tonight.